Well, my name is Ghada. I am a Palestinian from Gaza. I came here to Edmonton around 4 years ago, before 4 years ago. The decision to come here wasn't a choice, but rather what I call it imposed migration. I was studying in Britain, and when I am done, or I was done, I could not return to Palestine or to Gaza Strip because Israel declared that Gaza is a hostile entity. Egypt closed the border, and it was so difficult to get in. So I applied for a category here called highly skilled migrants, and I got it in 2010, and I came here from Britain. I was born and raised in Khan Yunis refugee camp. It's one of the 8 camps of the Gaza Strip. However, my parents and grandparents are from a village called Beit Daras. This village is no more in the world map because it has been demolished and depopulated by Zionist troops in the course of 1948 war, together with approximately 500 villages. This is why when I introduce or define myself, I say, my name is Ghada, I am a 3rd-generation Palestinian refugee. And despite the fact that I have never been to Beit Daras, my village, I feel strong attachment and unimaginable love and sense of belonging and yearning to the place. And all the time I say thanks for my grandmother for, planting the seeds of love in our heart. As many people know, or perhaps don't know, for a long period of time, we've been denied to study our history, or actually any symbol that is related to your homeland, be it a flag or a map, even drawing a map or possessing a book that speaks about Palestine. History, in a simple word, was deleted. I mean Palestine history. So my grandmother filled that gap. She stepped to tell us the story about Palestine that she knew, and Palestine that she's proud of, and Beit Daras. And as the writer Ramzi Baroud put it, it was the story or the narrative about Beit Daras, or about our villages, or about Palestine. It was like a daily narrative that defined our relationship as community. My grandmother knew in her heart that she could not return those who did and who are in the grave. She nor can return Beit Daras, but she wanted to make sure that Beit Daras, my village, is not exiled from human and history memory. And she wanted to make sure that we are aware of our history. And that was her mission. And I think to a large extent she was successful in that mission. And all the time I say, if I would be thankful ever to anyone, it would be for my grandmother who filled that gap. And this is why I feel now the obligation is really at my side, because I am thinking of the coming generation and my children and even my grandchildren. When my grandmother is no more in this life, who would tell them the story? Right, my parents, they've been like 3 years when the war of 1948 erupted. I think, like me, they got to the history through the eyes and lenses of my grandparents. And this is why it is so important to document the story. And this is why I felt, as my grandmother was successful in her mission and educated me on this, side of history and side of life, it's now my mission, my job, to preserve this history, to preserve this story, particularly at this difficult time, so that when Ghada, my daughter, she's 18, and my other 2 children, in a few years' time, they could tell their children the story of Palestine that they have never seen. Um, so it's difficult, when your homeland and your country and refugee camp now, because despite the fact that I am from Beit Daras, I am from Palestine, I have never been there. I was born and raised in the camp. And when Gaza and these camps and West Bank and Jerusalem and Bethlehem are on attack continuously, constantly by Israel, anyone could imagine the fear and the worry any Palestinian live in diaspora to witness in a normal society his nation being slaughtered. And you could see, you could follow, you could expect the worst in every single day. And I usually relate particularly to the Gaza Strip, where it witnessed 3 wars in the past 5 years, and which is now subjected to this inhumane blockade that is considered the longest in history, to put 1.8 million people under blockade, close the borders, sea, land, and air, deny them all their basic rights, including, rights of movement, rights, get access to health, education, food, even when they are now relating to the place as the biggest prison in the world, supermax prison. Sometimes I would say, I don't know if this analogy or similarity would work anymore, because Gaza is ghetto now, and even if you are in a prison, you have the right to be fed. You have the right, if you are sick, to find access to assistance, to a doctor, to a nurse. If you need medication that is not provided, then to be, sent to a place that could provide these things. This unfortunately does not happen in Gaza. I was among the lucky people who got the chance to study abroad. So I got scholarship in 2000 to do my master's in Britain, and this is how I traveled outside Gaza ghetto. After that, I returned, and I got another scholarship in 2002 and to pursue a higher education. And when I was done, as I said, it was so difficult to return, because 2007 Israel declared Gaza a hostile entity and the border has been closed. Even the possibility to board a plane was impossible, because they would always ask you, where are you heading to? And you would say, I am going to Palestine. And they would say, but Rafah gate or Rafah crossing, the only lungs for Gazans to get in or to get out, the Gaza Strip is closed. So I would say for 6 months on a row, even I lost my work at that time in 2006. I just traveled, to do 1 month, some work in Britain and get back to my job. But I couldn't, and eventually I lost my job and I couldn't return to Gaza. In 2007, I was done with my PhD, and I traveled to Egypt. And I stuck there at Rafah Gate for 40 days, in the heat of Sinai Peninsula. The temperature is over 45 degrees centigrade, with sometimes you're left with no man's land, because the Egyptians could check you to get in, and the Israelis, and actually not the Israelis, I am sorry for that, because that was 2003. 2007, Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip, so it was a collective punishment to close, the Gaza borders, because the EU observers has left, and Egypt said, according to the agreement, there should be EU observers at the crossing point. And at that time, there has been maybe 12,000 people stuck, waiting for Rafah Gate, or Rafah Gate, as many Palestinians call it, to open. I waited for 40 days. I could not get in. And fortunately, I had a visa to return to UK, so I returned. I defended my thesis 2008, and as I said, I was lucky enough to get to work. I always think of those people who don't have a choice, who don't have alternative. And particularly even now, like 2008, even the situation was a bit better than now. But now think about Palestinians stranded at Syrian borders, Lebanese borders, Libyan borders, Iraqi borders, Palestinians who cross every day through the sea, legally or illegally, trying to look or search for safety. It's really difficult. And try to think again of those who are in the Gaza Strip, the prisoners who cannot even have the chance to leave the place, with very few options to earn or to find employment. So how is the life in Gaza? It's at the moment, I would say the situation is very, very bleak and very, very dark, because if we want to talk about Rafah crossing, it has been closed constantly after the war. Maybe 2 or 3 times they open it. There were lots of broken promises, to reconstruct Gaza, about all the money that's gonna be poured into the Strip and rebuild what Israel has destroyed during the war. Unfortunately, over 6 decades now, Palestinians only get broken promises and empty words. On the ground, nothing is happening. And when you talk about a community or a society with over 55% under the age of 18, when you talk about over 45% unemployment, you could imagine the disastrous situation that people live in on daily basis. So I ended here. It wasn't a matter of a choice, but rather imposed migration. We were lucky that our papers got accepted in Canada, and we came here. And I regard Canada as a home, because it's peaceful, a place where the rights of the individual and the collective are respected. It's a safer place, and a place that gave you your rights. And this is like first time ever in life that you have rights that are protected, and at the same time you are not only enjoying them, but also you are enjoying the safety. And with the safety and the peace environment, this gives you the chance of the creativity and I would say sense of settlement and sense of peace of mind, that things that Palestinians back home in West Bank or Gaza are missing, or in every single minute in their life. I'm currently working at the University of Alberta as a researcher and visiting professor at the Political Science Department. This is really a great opportunity, because it gives you the chance to learn, and at the same time to contribute to the knowledge and literature about Palestine and Middle East in general, and help for better understanding about what is going on, particularly with the mess that is happening now in the Middle East and all of the Arabic countries after the Arab Spring. Part of my work, our let's say achievement in 2014, that I had my first book published. It is or going to be published. It's coming soon in this fall, 2015. It's called Apartheid in Palestine: Hard Laws and Harder Experiences, and it speaks part of the book that I am editing. It talks about the Palestinian history and the Palestinian narrative. So approximately a full section is talking about 1948, the story that took place there, what had happened in 1948, what is happening now, and what is the link between now and then. We also try to cut across 3 sites of knowledge: the political science, the history, sociology, and by inviting many scholars and activists, as well as indigenous people. Everyone is writing about particular issue in Palestine-Israel conflict, and to see what is the link. The basic argument in the book is saying that what is happening nowadays is an extension to what had happened in 1948. So I start by narrating the story of my grandmother, 1948, Beit Daras, the village, the beauty, the history, the identity, the culture, the place that used to be Palestine, and the place that she always say, everything there has a taste, even happiness has a taste. So I started from there and see from 1948 and try to trace the events from that point of time till now and compare my experience as a third generation of Palestinian refugee, the eldest daughter or granddaughter for my grandmother, and compare the two experiences and come, to the conclusion what is happening now, especially after the latest war in Gaza, the destruction, the humiliation, the blockade. It all has a root. It all started at some certain point, and unfortunately it's continuing until this point of time. More casualties and less hope, more process about peace, but less peace, lots of speech about safety, but on the ground there is no safety. So we try to assess all these things, and at the same time our goal, as I said at the beginning of this interview, to preserve this history. When my grandmother, or that generation, I would say 1948 are no more in the picture, we want to get the story. Now the Palestinian situation is getting into very difficult impasse. We as individuals, and even I would hear it the same remark of many people, the wave is bigger than us. What can we do? What could we do? I believe everyone has something to do. If Palestinians are doing their best and most to stay steadfast in their land, this is a form of struggle. When my grandmother is singing, the stories of, the songs of the wedding, and the stories of Beit Daras, the beauty, the farms, the water wells, and, the sound of the birds, she's bringing to life all this history. So she's doing her bit of a struggle. These students now and people who are jobless sitting there just waiting, for these promises that have been promised for Palestinians to come true, and they still have the hope. They are also doing their bit in this struggle. So I thought my bit of this struggle is just to preserve this history and put it in a document called a book, so it could be accessible to many people, including Palestinian and non-Palestinian. It's going to be in English, so lots of criticism that this literature is in Arabic. People cannot get access to it when it is in English, because it is not in English. So now it is in English, and also for Palestinian generations and Arab generation who have been born in diaspora, in exile, so that they know their history in a way that humanize the Palestinian question. We try, in this story to tell the real story, that people lived it. It's not from imagination. It's no more about, figures and facts and records and terror and all this story. I say, sorry, my history did not start from this point. My history is decades before that, and I would claim centuries before that. So let's start from the beginning. This is the root causes. This is what had happened. And I think knowledge is important, awareness is important, education is important, and this book is gonna fit within this circle of educating and introducing the sense of life and sense of meaning of homeland for the first generation who witnessed the Nakba of 1948. So I say that lasting peace in the Holy Land, in Palestine, means justice and accountability. And justice means implementing the right of return for Palestinian refugees. And by doing that, recognition and giving rights back to their owners, I think this is the only way for lasting peace, and is going to be benefiting everyone, not only in Palestine, Israel, but in all the world. And at the end of the day, the right of return is fundamental and alienable, individual and collective right. It has been enshrined in international law as well as in Geneva Convention, Universal Declaration of the Human Rights. So it was not something of the invention of Palestinian people. This is a right, and rights are not negotiated. I've never heard as a political scientist that rights are negotiated. Rights are rights for Palestinians and non-Palestinians, for white and not whites, Christians, Muslims, Jews. So if we are really genuinely looking for a lasting peace in the Middle East for both Israelis and Palestinians and all the world, this should be our starting point, the international law, the right of return for Palestinians, so that those in the Gaza Strip and Palestine, West Bank, and those who live in 1948 areas could feel and benefit from the spirit of the peace, and they could move in their life on. They could start, looking for their future and their children. This is something that they have been denied of for generations now. And for those who live in diaspora, like us here in Edmonton and everywhere around us in the exile, so that they could enjoy this, moment. As I mentioned at the beginning, it is always when something is happening there, your heart is there. And I wrote once saying, my body here in Edmonton and my heart is in Gaza and my soul in Beit Daras. I am a fragmented person. So in order to have the collective of Ghada, the soul, the mind, the body, and when I say Ghada, I mean the Palestinian refugee in Edmonton, in Palestine, in the Middle East, we should give rights back. This is going to be the only way for a lasting peace in the Middle East.